All right. Hi, I know not everybody's here yet. My name's Kenzie. I am the assistant chief flight instructor here at Chesapeake. I have been here 1.5 years. I've been flying since 2020. I went through a 141 school. Don't know how much of terminology you guys have gotten through, but former college program. I flew 3 days a week for 4 years, pretty much. And now I'm here. I absolutely love to teach. Didn't think I'd love it this much, but here we are. And I've hit my 1,000 hours for the airlines and decided to stay because I love it here so much. I will teach probably the majority of the classes. I haven't been here in the beginning. I wasn't quite feeling 100% quite yet. I just got my new ACL. So if I do sit down for some of this, I do apologize. I've not stood for 2 hours at a time yet, but we will give it a try today. Yeah, so I think you guys are doing your little attendance sheet. I know about that, so good on you guys. And ask questions. Tell me about yourself. I'll probably stop. We'll take a couple breaks tonight, and I'll stay up here unless I have to go to the bathroom. Otherwise, you guys can ask me questions during that. Yeah, so we'll go around the room once a couple more people show up and we'll introduce ourselves. If at any point you need to leave, like go stretch your legs, I don't care, just don't be too disruptive. I'll tell a couple fun stories if you guys look like you're nodding off and keep you engaged. All right, I can see how lively you guys are already. This is gonna be great. I don't know who's your whoever's listening to this, who's your guys' favorite teacher so far? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, pretend the recording's not recording.
I feel like you've all been great in your own ways. Like you all teach differently, but
Good. Yeah. I purposely signed up for all the classes where I'm proctoring the tests and quizzes because that's the easiest class to teach. So we'll get you guys prepared for that. I've taught 2 of these ground schools. We've we've improved what we've done so much over the last, I think, 2 years of this. So hopefully it only gets better every year, right? And we love taking all of your guys' input and feedback. So please let us know if there's anything we can do better. And let me know how the temperature feels because I'm already getting a little bit hot. But yeah. We will start all the way in the back with the white hat. What's your name? Jared. Next. What? Darren. What is it? Speak up. I can't hear. Luis. Logan.
Blair,
Erica. Owen.
Janet, Alicia,
Jeff. Robert.
James.
Joseph.
Up front. Skipped right to you.
Janelle,
Dennis.
Connor. And what's your name? Jean. Hi. I won't remember any of those. So I do apologize. It's nothing personal. I'm horrible with names unless I see you often or you guys give me a hard time. Don't take it personal. How many of you have started flight training or ever been in an airplane? Ah, that's much more than we did. You were here with one of the other ones.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, you stuck around. That's your favorite, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So any questions about the homework? Don't be shy. I need participation or I'm gonna fall asleep too, okay? No questions. You guys understood everything. That's what you're telling me.
I think it was a little confusing with the higher you go, the less dense air is. But in the book, it kept saying like one part of the altimeter reading that like cold air and stuff makes it more dense, and they kept saying that it would be higher. It would tell you you're higher than it would be, and I was like, I don't understand that. If it's cold, it's more dense. It's saying that you're lower.
Oh, 3 people just walked in. Raise your hand. Name?
Chad,
Cool. I just told them I'm not going to remember your guys' names, but I'm Kenzie. And how many of you are licensed pilots? Anybody? Sometimes we have 1 or 2, right? You remember?
Yep.
One or 2. And you guys didn't have any questions about the ground school? Or the homework, sorry? Cool, sounds good. Does everybody have what they need? Does everybody have what they need? Yeah, all right, go ahead.
I did notice in the PowerPoint
Yeah.
that they were using the ESP to calculate density. And I saw a couple of slides on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I brought mine, but I didn't.
If we have time, we'll go over that. Thank you, that's
That
what I
was
was
confusing.
yeah, so does everybody know what an A6B is? It's this absolutely horrendous device here. We all hate it, but we will learn to use it and we will learn to appreciate it. There will be a couple lessons that you might have seen that's like cross-country planning, and there's not really any subject matter in those like slides. I don't know how much you guys can see with what's coming up. But typically we'll sit down with a sectional map and everybody gets their own, and we go over this wonderful thing. And that would be part of learning it. So if we don't get to it today, it is going to. You'll hear me say a couple times tonight, you don't need to know that, or that's background information, or this is just for the test. It's very true. I was in your shoes once, except I sat in the back and I've played video games the whole ground school. I definitely know what it feels like to have to sit here, and it's miserable. It's not fun every single night. Sometimes it's fun. But I try to make it as entertaining and easy to follow as possible. Okay? If I'm boring you, stop me, because I will ramble on. And you two that just walked in, names? Samantha? Ah, cool. I'm Kenzie. I'm the assistant chief flight instructor at Texas Academy of Aviation. If I sit down, it's because I just had knee surgery and I don't feel like sitting. So, speaking of which, we'll walk to that. All right, questions before we start? Cool, you guys are so lovely. I love it. I have some notes here. Well, what did you need? Well, the story I like to tell is that one of our other flight instructors, Corbin, I don't know if you've met him. He might have been sitting in the back of your class last week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he, all the flight instructors and I were hanging out, and we were running from a ghost or something of the sort, and Corbin tripped and fell. And then I tripped and fell on top of Corbin. Corbin got up, I did not get up. Then I walked like 3 miles back to the car. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience, but I had torn my ACL, and so got a new one. Very fun story. All right, so please tell me this is gonna work. I love that. Anybody know how this thing works? So I really don't want to have to click through this. Ah, it works. All right, we're good. So we're going to talk about different flight instruments today. All right. I don't love to follow the slides exactly, but I will kind of go with them. There's our chief flight instructor looking around. So we're going to focus on the 6-pack today and the pitot static system, which probably means, hopefully means something to you at this point, but it might mean nothing, and that's okay. So the 6-pack is just our standard gauges that we have in the airplane that tell us our altitude and our speed and if we're turning or not and things like that. And we'll go over all of those in depth. Safe to say those are important for the test and real life, okay? So we'll start with the pitot static instruments. So this is what a 6-pack looks like. We'll start, this is our airspeed. Oh, I have a lazy place. This is our airspeed, all right? And if I'm blocking you, no. That's our airspeed. So can anybody guess what that does? Go ahead.
Did you hit record?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And if I didn't, it's okay. I don't care. Anyway, yes, I did. Does anybody know what the airspeed shows us? Beautiful. How about this thing? Does anybody know what that's called?
Right.
A horizontal, no. I'm losing it. I'm losing it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's like I look at this every single day. We'll come back to that one. The altimeter. It's been a long day, okay? The altimeter. Does anybody know what that does? Come on, you got this. Beautiful. What is this thing? And what would that tell you? Whether you're coordinated. Does anybody know what that means? Beautiful. What is this thing? That is your compass, your heading indicator. So that tells you what direction. And how about this last one? There's kind of a giveaway. Participation. Vertical speed. So that tells you how fast you're climbing or descending. The
Attitude.
attitude indicator. Thank you. I don't know why. I promise I do know things and I am qualified to be up here. So that tells you your attitude, whether you're pitched down, your nose up, if you're turning or not, has different degrees of banking and nose up here as well. But we'll talk about all that today. So a little bit about air density. So air molecules are piled up on top of each other. So that's kind of what he was talking about. The higher up, the thinner the air, right? We all know that. There's no air in space kind of thing, right? And as you get closer to the ground, there's more and more piled up on top of you, which is why you feel more pressure as we're down here than you do maybe at 10,000 feet. Does that make sense? And this kind of has a beautiful illustration. I hate these pictures, but this guy's feeling a lot less pressure than the guy down here, right? That's the gist of our picture. This is what our pitot-static system looks like. Don't get overwhelmed, okay? It's not that bad. So we have our pitot tube. Pitot tubes come in a couple different shapes and sizes. And we will probably take a field trip today and look at a couple, because why not? But basically all you need to know, air goes in the front, something measures how hard the air is hitting inside the instrument, and it tells you how fast you're going on this indicator. You don't need to know all the little nitty-gritty dials and switches and stuff that happen in the system for the test in real life for anything. If you would like, you can YouTube it, and it'll go super in-depth if you would like it. No. And then we have our static source, that just takes in the pressure from outside. It tells you what the air pressure is outside, goes into those systems, and the altimeter and the vertical speed indicator will use that information, and the airspeed indicator will use that information to tell, oh, are they climbing? Are they descending? And we'll kind of break that instrument down a little bit more later. Here's another beautiful illustration. Once again, we'll take a field trip. So here is what a Piper pitot tube, pitot mass is what we call it, would look like, where the static port and the pitot tube are on the same kind of mass. So your pitot hole, I guess, where to measure how hard that air is hitting, is here, and your static port is going to be down here. We will go in depth, I promise. So, if you wanted to know the inner workings of a airspeed indicator, it measures how hard it's hitting. It switches dials and it does all this stuff, and it tells you how fast you're going. Does anybody want me to go in depth with the pitot, the airspeed? Cool. There's a thin diaphragm. It moves. Once again, I have never been asked what the inside of a pitot tube looks like. If we're lucky, we will get, you've seen some of these instruments and stuff here. We might get one every later down the road, and if I find one, I will bring it up and we'll kind of circle back to this because it is interesting to look at. Markings on your airspeed indicator. So it's not just your speed, it tells you other things as well. So we have red line. Here, could anybody guess what that is? Never exceed. Never exceed. Noted by NE, VNE. It's a V speed. Have you heard the term V speeds yet? It's beautiful. No, yes, there's a couple people. Yeah. So V speed is just how fast. There's different speeds for different things that you can do with the airplane. So the highest one in an airplane is probably going to be VNE, never exceed. You are at risk for structural damage to your airplane if you exceed that speed. Is it guaranteed? No. Should you try it? No. This yellow arc here, does everybody see the yellow arc? The yellow arc is our caution range, okay? it's okay to go in the yellow arc, as long as you're not in turbulent conditions. If you are in turbulent conditions, you could structurally damage your airplane if you're going that fast. So if it's turbulent, stay in the green arc, which is the biggest arc. That's our normal operating range, with VME here, normal operating range. Most of the V speeds make sense. Never exceed normal operating, right? You can see this white arc here. Does everybody see that? So that's going to be our like flap range, okay? So flaps extended, right? Makes sense, right? So in this specific airplane, you can extend the flaps at 84 knots. Yes, 84 knots. Does that make sense how we got that number? If it doesn't, you have to let me know, okay? And we get over here where the end of the green arc, we get VSO or VSO and VS1. So VSO is our stall speed. So we have VS is stall. Sometimes airplanes only have VS. They might not have a VS1 or VSO, whatever. VSO takes stuff out. So flaps are down. If it has retractable gear, the gear is down, stuff like that. It's going to stall here, here, versus if it's just a clean configuration, the flaps are up, gears sucked in and everything, it's probably going to stall closer to here. Questions? I see some people writing, so I'll give you guys a second.
See the little arc dead center of that says miles per hour.
If you want it, some airplanes are in miles an hour, some are in knots, some have a conversion clock in there. We don't typically, in our airplanes at least, we don't use miles an hour. All of our airplanes are in knots. You will find some airplanes that have miles an hour. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a little bit different. But that would just be a little conversion chart for you. Oh. So we have maneuvering speed, which was not listed on that airspeed indicator, right? Nobody saw VA. They did. Let me know that it's wrong. So maneuvering speed is the speed below which you can move a single flight control one time to its full deflection for one axis of the airplane rotation only, pitch, roll, or yaw, in smooth air without risk of damaging the airplane. Really wordy, right? That is something that you might see like defined on that written test. All that's saying is you have the yoke and you are below maneuvering speed, you can crank it one direction and it's not going to break the airplane suddenly. You can pull it back, it's not going to break the airplane. You can push it forward, it's not going to break the airplane. You can jam a rudder in, nothing is going to happen as long as you're below maneuvering. Things that affect maneuvering speed. There's a whole bunch, so I want to make sure I'm not missing them. We have weight, CG, wing configuration, load factor, altitude, temperature, flight control settings, and angle of attack. If you didn't get that all, that's okay. Probably gonna go over it here. Nope, we're not. Anyway, so that's why I write my own notes sometimes. So maneuvering speed is affected by a lot, weight being one of them, right? If you're heavier, it's going to affect your maneuvering speed. If you have flaps or not, it's going to affect your maneuvering speed. All of that does not really affect you guys right now. You just have to know that there are things that change maneuvering speed. That's why it's not listed on there, because those things are ever changing, right? Some other V speeds we have, VLE, landing gear extension speed. None of our airplanes here are retractable gear, so you're in luck. We don't have VLE on any of our airplanes. VLO is landing gear operational speed, how fast you can go to extend the gear versus how much you can go with the gear just sitting out, right? You usually have to go slower to get the gear out, reduce that airflow, let the gear out. VA, maneuvering speed. VO, operating maneuvering speed. Not all airplanes have all of these V speeds, they're not all required, okay? People are still writing that down. Do you guys have access to the slides?
Yes.
Do you get it before?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So some of you have probably, who's gone through the slides? You don't have to laugh. No, that's good. I would suggest just skimming through them at least, like getting the big topics that we're gonna go over. It's gonna be really helpful, I promise.
So with VA, what's the acronym? What's the A supposed to represent?
There is none.
Nothing.
Nope. Some of them it's just a random number.
Yeah.
Okay, or letter. That's not enough. A is a letter. We have different airspeeds. Oh my god, this thing is not helping me back here. So we have different airspeeds, okay? Don't let this confuse you too much. Just sit down and there's different airspeeds, there's different altitudes. My advice to you is to just remember what their names are, and you can kind of mix and match the definitions. They do make sense if you look at them long enough, okay? So we have indicated airspeed, as shown on the instrument. Cool, indicated, that's what you're seeing. Calibrated is indicated airspeed corrected for position or installation error. We'll get back to that in a second. True airspeed is the calibrated airspeed corrected for temperature and pressure altitude. When you're flying as a private pilot, you don't really care about, you're not really going to pay attention to these. All that matters is your indicated airspeed. That's what's happening in the airplane, okay? Now you could calculate your true airspeed and your calibrated airspeed. You need to do your calibrated first. All that is saying is there's a lot of electronics and stuff in the front of this airplane, compasses and GPSs and just technology that's kind of messing with the airspeed indicator. Just a little bit. It's off by just a little bit. And you can calibrate your airspeed and get the very correct airspeed. It's not off by a whole lot. That's why we don't care to correct that beforehand, right? And it changes every now and then if you get new avionics or you fly in a different part of the world. True airspeed is then calibrated airspeed corrected for that temperature and pressure. Are we tracking? I see a lot of heads nodding, but I want to make sure that's not just a sympathy nod. Cool. All right, we're livening up a little bit. Did you get your picture?
Yeah.
Okay. The pitot tube may not be positioned accurate. Variables at different angle of attacks might affect the accuracy of your indicated airspeed. Air at sea level is very dense. We've been over that. Drag is high since the air molecules are packed close together. As an airplane ascends, it experiences less dense air. Results in less drag since the fewer molecules resist the airplane's forward motion. And that's why our true airspeed is changing just a little bit, because we are going faster as we get higher. But guess what? It's so minute, especially in our airplanes, because we're already just chugging along at 100 miles an hour, right? So we don't care so much that we need to calculate this before every flight. Does that make sense?
Do a lot of the planes here have the like true airspeed and the calibrated?
I've never calculated it for a flight that I've done. I've done it for the book work. I know how to do it, but there's never been a point in time that I had to calculate it for real life. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
You guys need to know that it exists, that there's a difference and that there is a way to figure it out. But the difference is so small, like a couple knots, that we just don't care. And most of the time in your training, you're also not going up very high for that to affect you either. Landing distance and true airspeed. This is one of those things that's not really going to affect you a whole lot, but we will talk about it. In thinner air, higher true airspeed is needed to maintain the same indicated airspeed. The aircraft stalls at the same indicated airspeed regardless of altitude. The longer takeoff distances are required at high altitude airports to achieve liftoff and acceleration due to the reduced air density. So there's a video, if we have time, I will show it, but there's a guy who is probably used to flying down here at sea level. Does anybody know our elevation here? 660, perfect. So we're close to sea level. You go over to Colorado in the summer, that air is so thin. it takes so long for you to get off the ground. And there's actually, like, if we took our airplanes out there, we might not be able to take off. And there's just not enough airflow over the wings. The air is so thin up in Colorado on a hot day that we will never get off the ground. If we don't do the charts and the calculations on like our takeoff and landing distance, and I'll give you a glimpse of that here in a second. If we don't do those charts, we might not be prepared for the fact that we're never getting off the ground and then we're going to hit that tree at the end of the run. And we learn from everybody's mistakes, right? There are videos of people that do that, and you can see them, they get airborne for a little bit and then they just start sinking because there's just not enough power in that airplane or airflow over the wings to actually climb. And you might be like, oh, that sounds fake, but I promise it's not fake. Questions about that? Go ahead.
So if you're in Colorado with Avis, like, let you know about that?
Yeah. And so, have you guys seen this book? You guys probably have an online copy, if not a real copy. We have a classroom set. You cannot take them home. I'm so sorry. Data on the helicopter stuff. So this would be an example of a chart that you could do. This is a takeoff distance chart, and I'll walk around. But you can change your pressure, your altitude setting, and you can change how hot it is and how much you weigh and how much the wind is to calculate how long it's going to take you to get off the ground, how many feet it's going to take you. And so if you look, 10,000 feet is bringing your average up, right? More weight is going to keep that takeoff distance higher. Higher temperature is going to make that takeoff distance higher. Does that make sense? And we'll really get into these charts. If I could give you guys one bit of advice, it is practice the charts and the weight and balance and the flight planning as soon as you learn it in the classroom. Or if you guys want to go YouTube it yourself and get ahead of the game, the more practice with those charts, the easier they will become. They're going to be a horrible, horrible thing to you guys for like a week. And then you guys will be like, oh, I practiced like Kenzie said, and now I'm good. All right. What time are we at? 30 minutes. All right, not bad. So this is where the E6B will come in. We'll come back to this at the end of the night because we will probably have time. And we will do it on the E6B. That way I'm not just talking at you and telling you what to do and you guys not actually being able to practice it because it's not going to stick in your head. Does anybody disagree? Cool. So there are some airspeed indicators that you can set and find your true airspeed. Once again, never done it because I never get high enough or not that I don't care, but there's never been a condition where I need to really focus on that. Okay. But there is airspeed indicators that you can calibrate that. You won't need to do that for the test. You will use this for the test. Cool. Does everybody know what a barometer is? Tells you the pressure outside, right? We measure it in inches of mercury. I don't know why we use mercury. I'm sure there's a scientific reason. If anybody knows, you can share with the class. Cool. We use inches of mercury. A tube containing liquid mercury is filled and inverted in a vat of mercury. The weight of the mercury in the tube creates a slight vacuum as it tries to descend into the bigger vat. This is explaining our picture. The vacuum hinders the complete sinking of the mercury into the reservoir. Eventually, the column stabilizes at a specific height due to the balance between the weight of the mercury and the atmospheric pressure. Altimeters show your height above sea level, not above the ground. Don't worry, we'll talk about the difference. And we will talk about the inside of an altimeter. So measured in inches of mercury, we talked about why we use that vat thing with the mercury. I've never heard that before, but there you go. So the inside of an altimeter is a little more fascinating to me than an airspeed indicator, so I will go a little bit more in depth in this one. So there's what we call an aneroid wafer, and if I say aneroid wafer enough times, it's going to stick in your head because that's what happened to me in my flight instructor. He said it too many times. Think of an accordion. Does everybody know what an accordion is? So it's like kind of papery on the outside, right? So that's basically what our aneroid wafer is. It can expand and contract up and down, just like an accordion. This space here is filled with a select amount of air. It's filled with air from the outside, wherever you are outside, okay? Inside here, you can set a specific pressure using our Colesman window. Guess what? We will take a field trip and look at this and actually move one around, okay? And you can set the pressure inside our aneroid wafer here because it's moving up and down, right? We can move it. And as we climb, the pressure around the aneroid wafer is going to change, right? And so what that's going to do is it's going to pull that wafer apart, the accordion apart, or push it in as we climb and descend. And somehow that goes to the needles on the altimeter and with all these gears and such. And it tells you if we're climbing or descending. Aneroid wafer, aneroid wafer, aneroid wafer. Does that make sense? Kind of how that works? It's a little bit more fascinating than it measures the ram air of the air going into the pitot tube. If there's ever big topics that we go over, and I tell my students this, look it up on YouTube and watch 3 different videos on the same subject and listen to 3 different people. Now, 4 different people, because I'm also explaining it. 4 different people explain it to you in their own kind of way, and with pictures or diagrams or whatever. It will stick, I promise. The hardest part about this whole class is not retaining every single bit of information. You go home tonight and you sit down with YouTube, it's like TikTok, right? You sit down and you learn something, I'm sure you could look it up on TikTok. But you know, this is a little bit more fascinating. Questions on our altimeter? You guys are so lively. All right. So that means it's time for a field trip. Have you guys gone on a field trip yet? Nick took you?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will meet back here. You guys, whoever wants to follow me and look at our altimeter and look at the pitot tube and stuff, can follow me. Otherwise, we'll be back here in 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. So you get to sit in here. And maybe even go up.
How was your field trip?
Oh, it was good. Yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you that. Well, like I'm going for. Pilot. And if you're trying to do. What a lot of us do, go to the Air Force, have them pay for all of your training. I was just over in Africa with a bunch of dudes. And they look angry because they looked like Embry-Riddle. And then they joined the Air Force to help pay for the rest of it. And in the 4 years that this kid's been in, his friends were already moved up to the major airlines as captains.
So you're done.
And he is required to miss literally half of the 16 flight times if you're in the military. So it's 1,500, 700. He is at half of that flight time when they're already out of 2,000. So these kids are already making stupid.
Yeah, I think I read it.
And
I
he's sitting
don't
there
think they
looking at
confirmed
you.
that.
Now, his deployment's only 90 days, so it's a joke. We'll be there. Yeah, exactly. Everything's just, they literally stay in hotels. Oh, really? Yeah, so.
Instruction.
Yeah, okay, we're out there in like tents. It's hot.
But I like.
Yeah. So, when we were in, so Kenya, Somalia, and it was an all three. We were in Djibouti in the summer, it's a grand desert. We were out there doing the thing with actually PJs. The field temperature's 136. And we're saying that fully before. All that stuff, the heaters in the cars were like the air conditioning started to like overheat, and like the stars were like shining and stuff. Yes, please. Yeah, so if that's one of the things you're looking at, it won't be really fast. Get a lot of really good training. Deploy sprint deployments. And it looks amazing on the resume, but it's not gonna get you to the commercial side class.
So, couple good questions were asked, all right, I do remember them. So most of the time you have your altimeter setting. So we were setting the altimeter to field elevation, right, 660 feet, then getting our altimeter setting. 9 times out of 10, especially in this day and age, the airport that you go to is going to have some sort of weather reporting system, whether it be an ATIS, an automated weather observing system or something like that. They will give you an altimeter setting to put in. And so another question was asked is how often do you have to update that? Because the pressure, you guys don't know this, but since I was sitting there for all of you, since I was sitting there with all of you, some of you had 2980 on that. Some of you had 2975 and some of you had 2970, right? And that was all in the span of what, 10-15 minutes of me just sitting there. The pressure changed, not a lot, but it changed, right? So as we're flying along, if you're doing a really long cross country, it's smart to tune up an airport that you're kind of passing over and get their altimeter setting so that you can update and have the most updated altimeter setting. Yeah, okay, you're going to be off by 20 feet, 40 feet. It's not a big deal, but if you're sitting there doing nothing else, it doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt to tune in. Questions? I know that felt like a silly little field trip, but I like to stretch my legs, so.
Do they make ones that like auto adjust now? So.
Not that I know of.
Ever.
Maybe the airlines and stuff, but not our little beautiful, wonderful airplanes.
Can you keep the same altimeter setting that set when you leave your initial airport and you're going 300 miles to another airport, you just keep it the same, you don't have to worry about changing it
You can. But
until you get
If-
to that airport.
if the altimeter, you don't know if the pressure's changing outside, you can't feel that. But your altimeter would know, but there's no way for it to alert you that it has changed drastically. So you could think you're flying around at 2,000 feet and actually be at 1,000 feet. And then you could get into trouble with flying really low over a town or a city into a tower or a mountain, right? Especially, and I know this doesn't apply to you guys yet, but as you get an instrument rating and you're flying in the clouds and you can't see outside, it's very important that that instrument is very up to date with the current weather, right? Because you can't see the mountain that you're about to hit if you don't update it. Cool? Questions? All
I was
right.
gonna say, not a question, but a comment.
Mhm.
There is a really good video that goes into depth,
Mhm.
attached to the study guide for anyone who
Perfect.
hasn't watched it, but it goes more into depth about how.
You just want bonus points for thinking that you.
Right.
making you
No,
think
but
that
it
you
does,
did the
it does
homework.
help explain it a lot
Cool.
better.
Oh, no. Turn it off and back on again.
Just needs to be that. That's the button.
Oh, I have to do that. This is why I keep you guys around. All right, we talked a lot about an altimeter. So, the standard pressure lapse rate, do you guys know what the standard? Perfect, making sure it wasn't up there. Do you guys know what the standard temperature lapse rate is? Yeah. It's 2
degrees.
2 degrees what?
So
Per
for two,
1,000 feet.
for that.
So it's 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet, and it's gonna be 1 inch of mercury per 1,000 feet. So this is more for predicting, I'd say, like, especially in the winter, right? We're at risk for icing conditions, and we don't send up weather balloons off of Chester County to figure out what the temperature is at 5,000 feet, right? I mean, I don't, but if you do, let me know. But, if there's clouds and you're like, okay, well, it's 10 degrees Celsius sitting here on the ground, what would the temperature be at 5,000, the altitude that I want to cruise at? Well, you can do like a rough calculation on a standard day, the lapse rate is going to be 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet. So if we want to cruise at 5,000 feet and it's 10 degrees Celsius down here, it would be how cold up at 5,000 feet?
Well,
0. Because per 1,000 feet, we find 5,000 feet, minus 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet, so there's minus 10. If it was 10 on the ground here, minus 10 is 0. So that's just a rough calculation that you can do in your head. Does that make sense? Same thing with the mercury. I said I just had to reset it. Pressure changes over the whole country, and there's charts that we'll go into. That's an even more fun topic that we'll do is weather chart. Have you guys done weather? You guys know, you're in for a treat. But there's different charts where you can have areas of high pressure, areas of low pressure, and it's good to know where those are and if you're flying through them so that you don't hit that mountain that you can't see and you don't hit that tower that you can't see. Cool. The altimeter measures the difference between the sea level pressure and the outside static pressure of your altitude. Sea level pressure changes at a fixed location as well as between locations. You need a way to keep your altimeter informed about that changing pressure at sea level. So we can twist and turn. And what I'll do, if I have the app downloaded, if I don't, then you guys are out of luck for 5 minutes while it downloads. All right, you're out of luck for 5 minutes. We will listen to how to get that altimeter setting so that you guys aren't like, what does she mean to keep getting this altimeter setting? There's an altimeter fairy that just gives it. No, there is a recording. We twisted the knob. We did all that stuff. It does change. Showed you. There's a beautiful picture that shows you if you don't do it, what you could be at, what you think you're at. Great, the app downloaded. So. We'll go to Lancaster. Lancaster is like my favorite airport. And so this is the automated weather at Lancaster. Some guy once an hour sits up in the tower and he gives you the weather report. And you'll hear him say altimeter setting is blank. I don't know what it is off the top of my head because I didn't do my research before this, but we will listen. I'll try to stay next time. Live ATC.net. Nice app. They give you their other weather as well.
Like that information, lifetime TT 53 winds calm, visibility 10. Ignition clear. Temperature 0 1, dew point minus 0 6. Altimeter T970.
You got that? Yep, 2970. That's pretty close to what some of us had, right? And so how much of that was garbled for a lot of people? You vaguely understood what they were saying? That's good. Does anybody hear ATC? Good. That's my favorite ATC guy right there. All right, so as the I have a better explanation here. Because colder air is denser, providing more lift. Wait, no, a mass of air having temperatures different from standard distributes its weight differently in a vertical direction. When temperatures are warmer, air expands and the expanded column is taller. The pressure level is taller in the warmer air. Airplane A's indicated altitude is 4,000 feet. And its true altitude is 425 feet. So think this is one chunk of air. These are all the same chunk of air. They're just at different temperatures. So they're taking up more space because it's thinner, because cold air is denser. If you don't believe me, I'm sorry, and that's just the way that it is. You just have to remember that. So on the hotter days, the air is thinner, your indicated altitude is going to be lower than your actual altitude, okay? Because of the way that it is. I'm sorry. When an altimeter setting is not available, hopefully you're not taking off knowing that there is no altimeter setting. So we would do what we just did down there. I wasn't listening to our weather here at Chester County. So I just set it to field elevation, and that was in fact a pretty accurate altimeter setting, right? I'd say, because he said the same exact number that we read off the altimeter, right? So you just set it to field elevation, that gives you your altimeter setting, you should be good to go fly. As long as you're staying local, typically the altimeter setting is not going to change. Most of your flight training is pretty local. Okay?
So I have a question, if you didn't have that information, and I just went to my phone and looked at the current barometric pressure, is that valid to set?
Yeah, I'd say so. I never have compared like Apple or Apple to like ForeFlight, but people do use ForeFlight, and I assume that they're getting it from pretty similar places. Now, as you're in the air flying around, you're not going to have access to that. So you have to just tune into an airport's frequency, and it would sound just like that guy there. Cool? That is the official way to do it. Just said that. You should set an altimeter in a closest station within 100 miles. If we're above 18,000 feet, do you guys know about airspace yet? Yeah. So we have different airspaces. Class Alpha airspace, the highest tier of airspace, starts at 18,000 feet. That's where the big airliners go. To give you some reference, we stick around 5,000, right? In our little trainers. It depends on the day. But as soon as you get to 18,000 feet, We don't care about altimeter settings, because those guys are moving so fast and so far. Do you know how many times they'd have to change that Daniel Holzman window? They don't want to deal with that. So everybody above 18,000 feet just sets it to 2992. Everybody. Cool? And then everybody's is the same. Or that's what we have, where you can actually adjust it. There are altimeters that you can't do that. I've never seen one. I don't know how they work. We did this in the airplane, rotated the knob. If you were, I know for a few groups, we just went and set the Kohlsman window to 2992. We didn't just look at 660 feet. So when you set it to 2992, you are getting what it feels like outside. How thick is the air outside? What, if I were to take off, what does the airplane feel like? What do the wings feel like? So I know that sounds a little bit weird. So at 2992, that's our standard, right? At sea level, it should be 2992. As we climb, it's going to change a little bit, right? Now here, we're probably not going to, like, if we set it to 2992, depending on if it's colder outside, we might be getting really good performance because denser air is better for the wings, more lift, right? And it might say negative 100 feet, right? If we set it to 2992, because the performance is so good to our wings. It's a really hot day and we set it to 2992, it could say 2,000 feet. And that air is super thin at 2,000 feet in a standard day picture, right? We go up to the mountains at 2,000 feet, the air is thinner. And so even though we're at 660 feet, the air can feel like 2,000 feet above sea level. Are we tracking? I know it's kind of a weird concept unless you're able to practice it. That goes back to the Colorado thing. If we were to try to take off on a hot day in Colorado.
So a question about that. So we're using like trainers here typically. Are normal like general aviation planes have more power? Or is it like you could go to Colorado, it's your high, it's hot, and like a lot of small aircraft just can't take off or will struggle to?
Yeah. So I'm trying to make sure most people can see me. So we call them trainers. They're very normal airplanes for just a regular person to have. Like they're commonly used for training because of their performance, weight and balance, size, easiness, right? They're easy to buy because there's so many of them. You can get slightly more higher performance airplanes like the Cirrus that are down there, that bright green thing out down there, that's a Cirrus. A lot more power, right? That doesn't mean that it might do better, but it doesn't mean it still can always do like that Colorado scenario. It just depends on the plane, the weather, the engine, which, you can get a plane and add a better engine to it. So it's not just a blanket statement. That's why doing those charts that I kind of showed you in the beginning is really important. So if we were to do that, I'm not going to pull it out, but if we were to do that chart and it says, oh, it's going to take 8,000 feet to take off, that's fine. As long as you have 8,000 feet of runway, right? we have 5,000 here, right? So most of the time we can get off the ground in the summer. There's never been a point where I was ever scared because of the weather. Was there a time that I was not piloting command and I was with my pilot friends and they may have overloaded the airplane and that was a scary takeoff because we weren't climbing very well? Yes, but that's besides the point. That was not weather related. Does that make sense?
Does that mean the runways?
Typically, sometimes it depends on where you go. There's also just people that accept that they're not flying in the summer. And there might be runways. I've never flown to Colorado, so I don't know. I'm making this up. But there could be, a mom and pop flight school, little flight school with 2 or 3 airplanes that just close in the summer because they know that they're not going to get off their short runway. But in the winter, it's fine. They get great performance, right? Again, don't pull me on that. Cool. Look like you were about to say something. No. altimeters show our height above mean sea level, MSL. Has everybody seen the term MSL? Everybody knows what MSL is. Does anybody know what AGL is? Above ground level. Look, it's like an acronym. It makes sense. So we have to do a little bit of converting sometimes with sea level and AGL and MSL and our current altitude. So an example of that, a calculation, not really, that I do every day is our practice area is about 500 feet down near Oxford, Cockerville area. At 500 feet above sea level, if our altimeter is reading 2,000 feet, I know that I am 1,500 feet above the ground. Cool. Now there are laws about how low you can get, so that's something you really need to know as you start to fly lower. But typically for flight training, we stay between 2,000, 4,000. Would you, us pilots who fly here, would that be correct?
More or less.
I don't know what Colby's crazy. Well, yeah, you can get lower for the ground reference maneuvers, but we're not getting 500 feet from the ground, right?
Well,
All right, don't tell me. Because I'm in charge of him now. So standard temperature and pressure is that 2992 that we talked about, and 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you're like, oh, more numbers to remember, guess what? Test taking tip. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the beginning of this book that you will be given for all of your tests and stuff. Unrelated, but there's an entire legend on sectional charts in the beginning of this book. So if you say, oh, I forget what class Alpha airspace or class Bravo airspace looks like, look at the book. It's in the front of the book. If you forget kind of what that temperature conversion is, if you're like, oh, I know Fahrenheit, but not Celsius, somewhere in here, there is a conversion chart that converts Celsius to Fahrenheit for you. I'm not going to find it right now, but it's in there. All right, so don't worry. Just remember 15. It's an easier number, okay? Or 20 or 59, whatever you want. I won't tell you. So, our altimeter corrects non-standard pressure conditions by using the appropriate local area altimeter setting. The temperature deviations from the international standard atmosphere lead to the true altitude exceeding indicated altitude in warmer conditions and falling below in colder temperatures. Guess what? If you're in an airplane and you're flying at this airport and you set your altimeter setting like you're supposed to do, like everybody does, everybody's altimeter will read the same thing. Right? And if you fly along and you're going past Lancaster and you tune in and you listen to that guy on the ATIS and you tune in the right altimeter setting, like everybody else in the area is doing, everybody's altimeter will read the same thing. You don't need to worry too much about that changing thing that it's talking about, how it's going to exceed the actual indicated and absolute and all that stuff. Don't worry about that. Everybody sets their altimeter the same, everybody indicates the same thing. Cool. True altitude discrepancies in colder than ISA temperatures pose a risk of insufficient obstacle clearance because you're lower than you think you will. In training, you're never going to get, you should never get lower than 1,000 feet above the ground. Typically, we're way far away from all obstacles. Is that at least true? Please tell me.
Yes, yes.
I hate this thing. Pre-flight check for altimeter conditions involve adjusting the barometric scale to the local altimeter setting. That's what we just talked about. We'd listen, we'd get that setting, we'd put it in. We didn't have that setting, we could set it to field elevation because we know that that's what it should be. I wonder if it's dying. Probably. It's embarrassing. No. All right. Pressure altitude is employed in the performance computations. There's a chart in here for pressure altitude. This is that first thing that practice it. Go home and practice doing this chart, whether it be tomorrow, the next day, before the next class. Okay. Watch YouTube videos on it. I promise that sooner, you don't want to save all the chart stuff for the same time and then have to learn it all at the same time. Okay? A standard day is defined when the sea level temperature is 59 degrees Fahrenheit and the pressure is 2992. Airplane performance charts are established under these standard conditions. Okay? All the charts use 2992 and 59 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit. So obviously it's never perfect standard outside. So we have to have a chart, another chart, to tell us when it's not standard. Climb rate charts necessitate two variables, pressure, altitude, and temperature. To determine pressure altitude, you set your Colesman window to 2992. And it will tell you what the air feels like outside, like I said earlier, right? Keep an eye on the 10,000 foot hand, especially on FAA tests. This is a test taking skill or thing. What it's going to ask you in figure 3, it's going to say, hey, what's the altimeter setting for figure 3 altimeter 2? Make sure you pay attention to this 10,000 foot altimeter hand, right? Because you don't see that one very often. And then we have our 1,000, and our 100 hand. Okay, just keep an eye out for that when you're actually taking the test. Don't know why we added that in there, but that's cool. Oh my God. Absolute altitude. Absolute altitude is your altitude above the ground. Radar, right? You have exact altitude above the ground. Absolutely. I don't know how else to explain that.
Do you guys have that equipment in the?
We have it in our helicopter, which I just pointed is not here rated, but we do have a helicopter. I'm sure you've seen it. It does have a radar altimeter. Our airplanes do not have radar. The big ones usually do. Guess what? We have a couple different altitudes. There's a couple more than the airspeeds, but guess what? If you know the terms, you can usually mix and match those definitions, right? Indicated altitude, you guessed it, as indicated on that altimeter. Pressure altitude, indicated altitude when set to 2992. Pressure, feel the pressure outside, 2992. True altitude, the exact height above sea level, the altimeter setting yields for that calculation, right? For that non-standard temperature and pressure. Absolute, height directly above the terrain, the ground. And density altitude, pressure altitude, corrected for non-standard temperature. If you want to take a picture of that screen, that's a very important screen. Or write those down and remember them later. Because these will all come up, unfortunately. Okay. All right. Just done talking about altimeters, right? Now you need them. Aneroid waveguide, right? Yeah. Vertical speed indicator. Basically has the same inner workings. It's detecting a pressure change in the like as you climb or descend. That's what it's detecting. It's not telling you exactly what altitude you're at. It's just saying, hey, there's a change and this is how much that change is. So it indicates in feet per minute. Right now, this one is indicating 0. A slow climb or a slow descent is typically around 500 feet. That's a pretty, you're not going to be popping any ears, right? We do emergency descents is one of our maneuvers that we practice. And you can get upwards of 2,000 feet per minute. And you're like, nose out of the ground. It's a lot of fun. Definitely recommend trying that. Have you done that?
Just only demonstrated what I've not done myself.
Just wait, it'll happen. So the one setback of this instrument is it's delayed by 5 to 7 seconds. So we could, in our training fighter jet, start a descent, and we could be going straight down, right? Not that we would in our trainers, but theoretically we could go straight down. It could take 5 to 7 seconds for this instrument to catch up and be like, oh yeah, we're like really descending right now, right? And then if we pull up and we're straight and level, it's gonna take a minute to get back to 0. Okay, so it's delayed by 5 to 7 seconds. It's the one instrument I'm fine crapping out on me in the air. I'd prefer to have my altimeter over this. But it can be useful, you know, to in instrument conditions, not as much in flight training. You might think, oh, I'm doing a maneuver, like turns around a point, and I'm turning around this point and I see my VSI says I'm descending. That doesn't really happen. You're usually just looking at your altimeter, right? Cool. This is what it looks like. Same kind of thing, just a little less technology. There's no Colesman window in this one. But it's still taking pressure, the air pressure from outside around that aneroid wafer, and it's detecting a change. It's not mandatory by regulations to be on board, but commonly present in instrument airplanes, which is the opposite of VFR. But anyway, it's not. It is part of our 6-pack, but it is not legally required. So you'll see some little putz around planes that are just like little aerobats that just go and have fun. They don't have a whole lot of instruments. They might not have all 6 instruments. They might only have a couple, because not all of them are mandatory. Before you take off, that should be reading 0. You shouldn't be indicating a climb or a descent as you're standing, sitting still on the ground, right? Now we're going to talk about the blockage of this pitot system. So let's see what pictures they have first. Ah, that's a great picture. Anyway, so there's a lot of tubes and wires and stuff running through our airplane, right? Obviously, there's a port on the outside of the airplane that has to get into one of those instruments somehow, right? There's a tube of air somewhere. Blockages happen, right? Icing happens, things happen, things break. So you need to be able to realize that something is broken, right? So say, we'll start with the pitot tube, right? The pitot tube is that thing that measures how hard the air is entering, how hard the air is hitting the pitot tube, which tells us how fast we're moving through the air, right? Yes. Yeah. So if the pitot tube gets blocked, say there's a bug. I've had that before. We've dug it out with a fork. Say there's ice, right? Water. Something is clogging the pitot tube. We're not getting that input, right? The pitot or the airspeed indicator uses inputs from the pitot tube and the static port, right? Hence picture, right? So without the reading from the pitot tube, we are just getting input from the static port. Do you know what that's going to do to our instrument? It's okay, so you know.
Gives you an invalid reading.
Gives you an invalid reading. Yes. So what happens is that airspeed indicator turns into, follow me, turns into an altimeter. Okay. Which you're like, what does that mean? Well, because we're not getting half of our input, we're just getting the static port pressure, exactly like an altimeter. What's going to happen is as we climb, our airspeed is going to go up, and as we descend, our airspeed is going to go down. And so I know not a lot of you have flown, but in normal flying, if we pull up and we start climbing, we're going to slow down. Altimeter goes up, airspeed goes down. Opposite, when we're descending, we're going to speed up as the altimeter goes down. So it's the opposite. The opposite is happening if that pitot tube gets blocked. As we start climbing, instead of slowing down, we get a faster indicator. Do we know why that could be dangerous? Yeah, if you see your airspeed climbing and now it's in the yellow and it's about to hit the red, what are you going to do? You think you're descending, so you're probably going to pull up, right? Well, in real life, if you're disoriented enough, you're going to stall, right? Because you're going to try to pull up to fix it, but that's just what's making it worse. Because you didn't realize that you didn't have a valid pitot tube reading. Cool. Now, is that a little dramatic for you VFR pilots? Yes, you're looking outside, but you're in the clouds, right? It's very easy to get disoriented. In the last ground school, one of them, the one guy just did not believe me, and I will preach this, but he was convinced that I was incorrect. Spatial disorientation. Have you guys heard of that? It's a real thing, I promise. Okay. You can't see outside, you have no horizon. Some of you have no idea what that feels like because you've always been 2 feet on earth looking with your eyes, right? Nobody's blind. I think everybody can see. But imagine closing your eyes, just trying to stand here, you rock a little bit, right? I'm not being dramatic, I do rock, it's not just my name. But in reality, you do rock a little bit. So if you have no horizon outside and you're relying solely on these instruments, you have to trust these instruments. Even though your brain is telling you you're turning, you need to trust, look at the instruments and be like, no, I'm not turning. Don't try to correct it. Cool? It's a thing, believe me. The next instrument that would break is our vertical speed and our altimeter. Now they don't use the pitot tube, right? They just use the static port. So if the pitot tube got blocked, the only thing it would affect is that airspeed indicator. Stop yawning and making me yawn. The only thing it would affect is that airspeed indicator. It wouldn't have anything to do with the altimeter. Now, if your static port got blocked, your altimeter would freeze, your airspeed would freeze, and your VSI would freeze. Wherever it was, it's going to stop. Okay? If you were descending at 500 feet per minute and your static port got blocked, it's going to stay at 500 feet, even if you're straight line. So it's important to realize and look outside and use your other instruments and be like, oh, something is wrong here. Now, aviation is all about redundancy, so we do have backups in place. Okay, so our static backup, we have something called alternate static. Under the dashboard of the Warrior or on the front panel of the Skyhawk, there is an alternate static port that just brings in air from inside the cockpit. It's not as accurate as the air outside of the airplane. This pressure inside is going to be a little different, especially moving around at 100 knots through the air, but it's better than nothing, right? And our airspeed, our pitot tube, we don't really have our airplanes don't have a second one, but some jets do, you know, some airplanes do have actual backups. Our fix is going to be pitot heat. Most of the time, our airspeed will be clogged with ice, or our pitot tube will be clogged with ice. It's not really, I mean, during your pre-flight, you should check that there's no bugs crawling in there, or rats' nests, or dust and all that stuff. But most of the time, it's just ice. Pitot heat's going to melt that. You get your airspeed back, all happy and done. But if, you know, in the off chance that you hit that bug just right now, it's lodged in your pitot tube, you could still flick on pitot heat and it's probably going to melt the bug away, as gross as that is. Pitot tube does get pretty hot. When you're checking the pitot heat, which you should do, especially in the winter, don't leave it on for 10 minutes. Go check your lights and go check everything else and then put your hand on the pitot tube to see if it's hot. So you will burn your hand off. What I tell my students to do is turn on the pitot heat, walk out, and just hold your hand on that pitot tube until you feel it start to get hot and then take your hand off. Okay? I learned from experience. Questions about blocked instruments? No? Ah, one.
Will it also be the same thing if it froze from ice? Or freezing?
On the pitot tube?
Yeah.
It would melt the ice away, the pitot heat. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so if there's ice on it and the pitot tube isn't on, always on.
The pitot tube is always bringing some kind of reading in.
Yeah.
If it was blocked for some reason, and in the Cessnas, you can see your pitot tube. You'd be able to see if it was iced over. Not in the Warriors because it's under the wing. But if you were to get ice, you just flip that pitot heat on and it'll automatically start melting the ice away.
Just theoretical question, if it's something more than ice, like pitot tube just somehow goes missing now, it's something in the air.
Yeah.
So at that point, that's just emergency, like.
That's why sight pictures are so important.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, right? You'll learn to, not yet, but more practice, you'll be able to fly a pattern without looking at your airspeed. I mean, you should glance at it, but the sight picture should be enough. You know, Ella and me are sitting there, and you're with Colby. Colby and I are sitting there, and we're not necessarily staring at your airspeed because we know generally what is correct. So hopefully that doesn't happen until you have a really good sight picture. But yes, it would be an emergency. And it's always better to declare an emergency and ask for forgiveness later. Yeah. Knowledge check. Which of the following represents the stall speed in the landing configuration?
D.
D? Anybody for any other letters? Everybody going D? Raise your hand for D. I see a couple hands going up. I'm watching. Good. D. Stuff out, right? Flaps, landing gear, all that stuff. What flight instruments are part of the pitot system? And we're pilots. We don't say A, B, C, and D. We say Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, right? Yell it out.
Delta.
I just said it's not it. Alpha? Ah, you're right. Which of the following is the definition of true airspeed?
Bravo.
Bravo. Anybody else going against Bravo? Love the enthusiasm. Very good. Which airspeed is not displayed on the airspeed indicator? Charlie. Oh, look, we're getting the hang of it. Good. Cool. So, questions about airspeed. Could you flick all the lights on? Questions about airspeed, indicator, altimeter, pitot system, PSI, sorry. I need to wake up because somebody's over there yawning. So questions.
Reading something about if everything was blocked to break the glass on the BSI. It's the equal instrument.
Yeah.
What does that do when you break the glass?
So remember, the anoid wafer is set to whatever we want, right? In the altimeter. But it's for the altimeter, not the. I mean, sorry. If you're in a pickle, you should just break whatever. But the anoid wafer is what we set to the altimeter setting. And then it takes air input from outside, hopefully outside the airplane, but if that gets clogged, the alternate static source, and then puts it around the anoid wafer, right? If both of those systems failed, you could break the glass and it would still work because it's still just taking the pressure from out around the anoid wafer. Cool. Do we want to do story time or ask me questions? We'll stay here for another at least 10 minutes.
Was there sign in?
What?
Was there sign in?
Sign in? Yeah, if you didn't sign in, come in over here. All right, who wants to hear about my engine failure? I love talking about this. Okay, we got a couple hands. Cool. Does everybody know where Scranton, Pennsylvania is?
Yes.
So there was one night, and when I leave here, they promised me, and I hope that they can hear me, that I get these parts from this airplane because these are mine. This is the airplane. This is my favorite airplane, A3076, that brown turd down there. I was who's heard this story other than you? Perfect. I was flying in Scranton. I had gone up to Vermont that day. And have you guys heard the Swiss cheese model yet?
No.
Couple people. So it basically says that in order, an emergency doesn't just happen. You just hit the right holes in the cheese over and over again, and it all adds up to create this terrible thing that happens, right? It's a whole bunch of little things that has to align perfectly for something bad to happen. I live by it's the 3 strikes and you're out. So my students sometimes hate it, but if 3 things go wrong, I'm scrubbing the flight. For example, Victor Tango, the green one we all went and sat in today, its transponder sucks in the heat, turns off. And so I remember with a student got in the airplane and transponder wouldn't turn on. So we had to get out of the airplane, get a fan, pull it down. Then we got up to the run-up area, it failed the mag checks. We came in, we got a new airplane, then we taxied back out. We still had time to do what we needed to do. We got up in the second airplane and it was just busy. The guy needed to solo. I was like, nope, we're done for the day. There's 3 things, we're not gonna push it, okay? Anyway, flew up to Vermont on this beautiful random evening in the fall and dropped one of my students off. He had flight training up to his bachelor party. I dropped him off. I was bringing the airplane. Well, I needed fuel. I'd been up for probably 3 hours at that point. I was tired. I was bored. Good thing I had my music, right? And I had the company credit card. I've never bought an avgas before because I was at a Howard airport with a flight school that paid for everything. And I stopped at this little teeny tiny airport, got $50 of fuel on the credit card. It felt like a big girl. Got me a whole like 3 or 4 gallons of fuel, which was not enough. Did not let me run the card again, because fraud. And so I was like, well, now I have to stop somewhere else. So I took off of that airport and did something that you should never do anyway, but this was not actually the problem. And I was like, well, I'm kind of low on fuel. I know I'm gonna stop somewhere else, but I'll reserve some fuel on this takeoff. I'm smart. Lean that mixture out just a little bit. Don't do that, just leave it full rich. As I'm climbing out of the airport, I know you guys probably haven't talked about mixture yet, have you?
We did.
So I leaned it out a little. You know you're supposed to be full rich when you take off. I decided I was better than that. And I'm taking off out of this airport, like 2,000 feet into my climb, the engine like hiccups a little bit. And I was like, oh, full mixture, instant reaction. That's what I was supposed to do. And the engine hiccup didn't happen again. I was like, ah, that must have been the problem. We're good. In reality, it was an exhaust valve cracking in my engine, but I didn't know that at the time. I decided to land at Scranton. It was like 8 o'clock at night. So by 8:30 when I was done in the bathroom and stretching my legs, and they finished fueling me up because of course I picked somewhere that I didn't have to do it myself. There was a storm rolling in. It was like probably 2 hours out. So it wasn't like crazy, like I'm in a rush. I'm the only one there. And it's a pretty big airport, I'd say. And taxi out, run up's fine. You know, I checked my engine, everything's fine. I did my pre-flight. You always pre-flight, especially after you've been fueled. But it was dark. Maybe I didn't see the fuel. And I went to take off. I go full power, full mixture this time. Don't worry. And at 400 feet above the ground, I got that little hiccup again. Except this time it's dark. And when I flew in, it was light, and there's mountains that I can't see anymore. And at 400 feet, I get a little hiccup, and it came back right away. And I was like, so it wasn't the mixture earlier today. It was another problem that's back. So shakily, I called on the radio. I was like, hey, I'd like to return via the pattern. And I started an early turn. We draw a rectangle around the airport. It's our pattern. Started an early crosswind that first turn. And I was like, hey, I'm going to return. I'm having something wrong. Something's wrong with my engine. And thankfully, I started that turn early, because usually we make that turn at like 600, 700 feet above the ground. I made it at 400. And about 45 degrees through that turn, the rest of the engine kind of just like puked and turned off. So I just finished that turn back and cried through the entire thing. Did not declare an emergency. The guy kept telling me it was okay. He cleared me for all ramps, taxiways, and runways, whatever I could take. I'm sobbing. It was great. Made it back to the runway with an okay amount of threshold, not really, but I would have liked a little more. But you're never supposed to turn around, but especially that low, but I had no other option, and that was my first instinct. There was no time for checklists. By the time my wheels left the ground, the airplane was fine and touched down again. It was 2 minutes. Like,
Wow.
quick. So I did not have time to think. But got on the ground, left it on the runway, fire trucks, police, everybody's coming to get me. I'm sobbing. They're trying to like reassure me. They pull my airplane off the runway all the way back, and I'm like, now it's 9 o'clock, and I'm like 2 hours away from home. So then somebody comes and gets me, and the FBO stayed open late for me so that I didn't have to sit in the outside and wait for my ride, and got in an airplane the next day and went back up there and went to see what was wrong with it. Everybody thinks I'm like overreacting or something. Landed on the runway that I had turned back to. It's a cliff on the end. Glad I didn't have to see that at night. And then we get to the airplane and one of the spark plugs is loose. How many spark plugs do we have? 8.
Yeah.
2 per cylinder. We have 4 cylinders. One of the spark plugs is loose. Connor, have you met Connor yet? He's our director of operations. He was the one that was with me. He like laughed at me. He's like, kidding me? Expletives were used. Because I declared an emergency and had all this because one spark plug was disconnected. Well, they brought a new harness, magnetos and stuff. They redid it. The engine still wouldn't work, so they knew something else was wrong. So they scoped it, and I had eaten a valve. The entire crankshaft was pitted and warped, and basically it never got power. So it was not my fault. It was just things happen. And you hope that your training prepares you. My little analogy that I was told was you start with a full bag of luck and an empty bag of experience. You better hope that by the time something bad happens and all your luck is gone, that your bag of experience is full enough to get you through the situation. But it was a great learning experience. I know so much more about engines now. And I'm much more confident and cautious, and I'm not stupid and buzzing the ground at night, flying around having fun with my friends. I hate night flying for some reason, but I still do it. But yeah, so that's my little story. I got a lot of little stories, but that's probably most exciting. So, questions?
You actually had enough time, like 400 feet in the ground to make the 180 back to.
Only because I had started the turn,
Oh.
and I barely made that one. And the runway was long, so if you think at this airport, if our runway is this long, and you take off around here, by the time you turn around, you're not gonna make that runway. But if you're have this big giant runway and you take off around here, and you have to turn around, well, the runway's huge, you're gonna make it. So luckily I had a long enough runway. I had started the turn and I didn't completely freak out, but did freak out a little bit. So, but good learning experience, Questions? What?
What happened exactly to the cylinder?